Well, good morning, guys. Good to see you this morning. It's my privilege this morning to introduce my good friend, John Krall, and we're going to have a conversation. I've been cashing in a lot of chips on guys I know who have real jobs, not like mine that doesn't accomplish anything. In fact, it's, diminishing returns in many cases, but we've been hearing from guys from different places in their life and how they bring wisdom to work. And you have a card today. These are your only notes that you take with you. And there's enough space for you to jot a takeaway and stick it in your pocket and then go do it. Because only 10% of what you hear will you remember, but 90% of what you do, you'll remember. And note this kick in the shins on the front side. Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. Sounds like a proverb out of the Office television show. All those people destroying stuff. But this morning, John, I've known John for about 15 years?
Oh, longer than that.
Longer than that, yeah.
20-some.
Oh, that many? Okay,
Yeah. So
we've had a few misadventures together and tackled a few things together, and he's been a true brother to me. And I've asked him to come this morning and share his story. So let's start this morning, John. Tell us a little bit about your own story and how you came to know Christ, and a little about your background, first of all.
So I was born and raised in Mitchell, South Dakota, home of the Corn Palace. You guys been there? Did you regret going there to see it?
Traveling all that way.
Yeah. So raised in an amazing, loving family, mother and father who loved themselves dearly, super devoted to the Catholic Church. I was, an all-star altar boy all my younger years. And I lived in a setting where my father gave us permission to experiment and fail. He always said, education costs money. And we proved that every time we broke something of his. And but he let us experiment and succeed. And growing up in that small town, I caught the eye of a beautiful young girl in the 8th grade. And I chased this girl all the way through college and I got yeses and nos all the way along the way. But the biggest no she gave me was she said, John, I can't pursue a relationship with you because you just don't know Jesus. And I looked at her and I go, hey, I'm an all-star Catholic boy, and that's ridiculous. And if you can find someone better than me, then go for it, And, part of the pride and part of the hardness of my heart, but God worked it out in an amazing way. And my wife of today led me to Jesus. She opened up the 4 spiritual laws to me. And I'm telling you guys, when I received Christ, the Word came to life. And it caught my attention in the simplest of ways. And once I received Christ, and this was in college, I just knew that no matter what I did, I was going to follow the principles of the Word and try to apply them in the simplest of terms. And, that led to this amazing journey of working for a lot of different individuals, whether they were nice or kind or good or difficult and unreasonable and hard.
Now, you were kind of a dangerous Christian, weren't you, at first?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, so I come to Mitchell, South Dakota, and I think, I'm pretty sure there's no Christians here. I come back, and there's like 23 Protestant churches, but you have that thought, it's so new and so fresh to you, and I go, well, I've got to help these churches, and so, one of the first things I did is I said, I want us all to get together and put a Billy Graham film on, and all the churches will gather together. I had this picture in my mind, and everybody would get along, and it'd be so much fun, and everybody would make Jesus famous in Mitchell, and God knew I had a pride problem, and so in the middle of this picture introduction, one of the churches, lo and behold, refused to go to the movie theater that Billy Graham was going to show it in because they're evil. And I go, wow, I never thought about that I got to come a way around this. So I said, no problem, I'm going to call Billy Graham Agency. We're going to get a 35 millimeter version of this and bring it into your church. So we did that. And but because I'm such a busy guy, I never saw the film myself. I was touting it, promoting it, And so I'm in charge of putting this film on, and I put the second reel on first. And I let this thing run for like 7 to 10 minutes. And finally, some guy in the congregation gets up and nudges me on the shoulder. He goes, well, don't tell the pastor I saw this in the theater, but you're showing the second half, dude. And God humbled me in the most amazing way. And of course, then it takes 5 minutes to unwind it backwards to put the next reel in. So
These guys are too young to remember projectors.
yeah. But God humbles the proud, and he humbled me. The other thing I thought I should do was, I need to help the Catholic Church. And so I went in there telling the pastor that, or the priest, that I thought I should be in charge of all their Sunday school courses. And we need to get the word out because, there's a few things you guys have been leaving out. And he looked at me like, I was from a foreign land, but my passion and my desire was to proclaim Jesus, and it just never stopped.
Well, what were you going to college to do?
So I went to a little school in Rangeley, Colorado, for flying. When I was a young man in Mitchell, I used to trim trees, and a storm came through, and I felled a bunch of trees for a guy that was hanging over his house that were damaged, and he said, look, I'm a local flight instructor, and I'll trade you out some flight time for this tree removal. I go, awesome. And then, I did 3 days of work and got 5 hours of instruction. I go, wow, this is crazy. I want to do this for a living. So I pursued aviation, went to a mountain flying school, and transferred to Denver, got my 4-year degree, and started my own flight department business in Mitchell, South Dakota.
Well, you see that the title of today's conversation is Working for Pharaoh. Let me explain a little context of that. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and they had to work for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh did not like them, and so he had them making bricks, and pretty soon he raised the quota for their bricks. They had to make more bricks, and then they had to go make bricks without straw, is the famous phrase. They had to go gather their own straw. The straw was the adherent that helped the mud stick together. And so he gave them 2 jobs and more bricks to make, and they slaved and slaved and slaved. And so we've given John this unsavory title of what's it like to work for Pharaoh. Because I've heard some of his stories, I want him to tell you a couple of them, and we'll get to some wisdom of how he applies God's wisdom in a context where your boss is unappreciative, oblivious, or just plain mean. So, John, tell us a couple stories.
Well, first I'd like to say, not all bosses are pharaohs that are dark and evil. I've had some amazing men and women who I've reported to or worked for that have just been nothing but kind, generous, and thoughtful, and helped train me out to be a better man. But I've also worked for a few individuals that make you shake your head, right? And one of my first experiences in South Dakota was, at the time, there were only 2 jets in the entire state, and one of them was based in Mitchell, South Dakota, and you'd see that fly off every once in a while, and you go, I think I could do that. I would love, pilots are like everybody that owns a car. You want the next fastest, better, bigger thing to fly and go do. And one day, the opportunity availed itself where I had a chance to go work for this, I love this term, high net worth individual. Anybody work for a high net worth individual? Right, it's just kind of a different ball game. So my interview kind of went like this. Well, do you want to work here? Well, yeah, I do. Well, there's nothing written in stone. Okay. Well, can you show up tomorrow? Yeah. Okay. Go to work. And that was my beginning. And this is one individual that was inheriting his company from his father who had passed away. And he's the type of guy, we'd take off on a morning flight, and we would get up to 17,500 feet, and we'd circle the airport at Mitchell. And then he'd say, go to Cedar Rapids. So we'd call up center, file to Cedar Rapids, and go there. And I leaned over to the chief pilot, and I said, well, why do we do that? And he goes, he doesn't trust us. He thinks that if we know where we're going the next day, we'll tell the store that we're going to go visit that we're coming, and the manager will have everything looking perfect. And so I go, well, he trusts us with our life.
So he obviously owned a string of stores.
Yeah, a string of stores throughout the Midwest. So we'd take off, and he'd tell us where we were going because he couldn't trust us. So one day when I was flying a trip, we had been coming back from the West Coast, beautiful, sunny, warm, to 30 below zero and cold in Mitchell, South Dakota. And I'd recently become captain of this Sabreliner jet and was flying it back home. And when we landed, we touched down, and it's customary to pull full reverse thrust and let the engine slow you down as much as possible before you apply the brakes. Because when the airplane's slow and heavy, the brakes are really effective. And when you're fast and light, the thrust reversers are the most effective. So I touch down, and as normal, I pull 102% of thrust, which is throwing all the power the engines have in reverse for the airplane. And all of a sudden, in a split second, the right thrust reverser leaves the airplane. And now I've got one engine full thrust and the other one full reverse, and I start heading for the snowbanks. Shut down the other engine and jumped on the rudder and the steering and got it just at the nick of time before going off the edge of the runway. And I'm kind of shaken, and the chief pilot looks at me and goes, "What did you do?" And I go, "I didn't do anything." We turned around, and then we knew what happened. We saw our thrust reverser and parts laying on the runway, and we knew instantly what happened. Well, the boss was in back, and he comes forward. What the H did you guys do to my airplane? I said, well, it appears that the thrust reverser left the airplane. And he goes, well, I want an account of this. So we go in, and the manufacturer comes, and because we didn't go off the runway and there wasn't damage to there wasn't an FAA investigation, but what was found was that the reason that thing came off the airplane is it hadn't been inspected in the last 700 hours. It was out of inspection 700 hours. And I looked at the chief pilot and the mechanic, and I said, how did we get here? And the guy admitted, he goes, I'm so tired of getting screamed at all the time when we have to go in for these inspections. I just wanted to put this one off until we did our engine overhaul and just save the hassle. And I go, man, we can't live like this. Everybody's lives are at stake. We can't do this. So anyway, we had a meeting with the other executives, not the CEO, and explained what happened. And they said, hey, guys, this has to stop. Well, the next flight we were going on, we had a loaner reverser on the airplane, and I'm flying the leg. And when we land, I don't pull any reverse thrust because I know the other one isn't inspected either. So the CEO comes up and he goes, are you afraid to fly? And I said, well, no. He goes, well, how come you're not using the thrust reverser? And I said, because it hasn't been inspected, and until it is, I'm not going to risk it. And he goes, you're done flying. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. He goes, you're relinquished to co-pilot only. And so I'm sitting here going, if you only knew the full story here, it would make it clear to you. So we had another meeting with the other staff people, and I explained what was going on, and they said, he goes, John, we know you're trying to do the right thing here, but you just got to let this thing pass, and we'll try to talk to him. Well, I spent 1 year as a co-pilot only for doing the right thing, exposing what wasn't happening, and trying to make it right in our company. And I was going to prayer with the Lord with that, and I just said, this guy does not deserve my service. And, one of the things that God instilled in me to do early on in life was to have older men mentor me and give me wisdom and counsel. And I went to one of my dear brothers in Mitchell at that time, and I said, John, I go, what do I do here? And he goes, John, who do you work for? And I go, well, I work for this guy. And he goes, no. He goes, you work for God. And he took me to Colossians, and in the verses in chapter 3 where it talks about slaves, obey your masters, and obey them because it's not them that you work for, it's your heavenly Father, and he will see what you do and reward you. And it just changed my perspective on, hey, I can give 100% effort every day, whether the guy I'm working for deserves it or not, because I do my work for the Lord. And then there's another verse in Matthew chapter 5 where it says, let your light shine in such a way that men will say the deeds you do and give your Father glory. I mean, it just became a calling card for me to put that simple principle in work. Well, what I didn't realize was happening is during that time, I started becoming the trusted aviator in the department, and I was treated more like the chief pilot than the chief pilot was. And I started learning more about what has to be done, making sure it was done, and all the underlings in the company knew that I was the go-to guy in the department, and God was preparing me for a bigger role to have down the road.
Well, being demoted to a co-pilot doesn't sound like all that bad a deal, but what are some of the other tasks that came along with that?
Well, as a co-pilot,
I mean, how did he treat you when you were on the ground?
yeah, well, there's certain people that don't know how to be appreciative. They just, the simplest of things, they don't know. He would climb on the airplane, he'd stick his head up in the cockpit, he goes, "Well, you guys aren't going to kill me today, are you?" And, you'd like to say something like, "Well, yeah, we were thinking about that, Or, "Well, did we do it last time we flew you?" I mean, what's the history here? But, I had many roles, but, the term as a co-pilot, you're kind of instructed, it's gear up, flaps up, shut up, right? Do your job, don't drive me crazy, let's get through this and let's be safe and efficient. But my job at this company, there were two of us that maintained 6 airplanes, and we flew them all. And so my work was never done. When I landed, I had another airplane to wash, restock, make sure that the maintenance was done on it. There'd be another airplane that we had in the middle of an inspection that we'd jump on together. And we were constantly working on equipment. And because I was so conscientious of the next thing that needed to be done on time, we'd come home from a 7-day flight, and the next morning I'd be out the airport at 7 a.m. And my work and life balance just got totally out of whack. And then that's a whole nother conversation with men who love you that talks about, the times that you have to say no.
Okay, so the pillar of cloud came and the Red Sea parted and you got to Minneapolis.
Yeah,
You
amazing.
escaped Pharaoh, and what happened in the Promised Land?
So this is a true story. I'm literally under the Saberliner jet washing the hydraulic fluid and crud off the belly, and I'm praying. I go, Lord, I just believe in my heart I can do more than this. I just feel like you've prepared me for something else. And 2 weeks from that point, this guy sold his company out. And a Fortune 500 company in Minneapolis bought it. And the next thing I knew, I had my family packed up in the family truckster, and we were coming up to Minneapolis. The country folks were coming to the city. And I come to this flight department as a junior guy, and I'm amazed at the professionalism, the resources, the attitude, the willingness to do it right every day. And I'm just sucking it up and eating it up. And of course, my work ethic is something where I kind of scared these guys because, I'm just used to doing everything. I go, "Well, you mean we don't have to wash the airplanes?" "No, we got guys that do that." I go, "Really? We don't have to wax them?" "No. We don't have to wrench on them every day?" "No, we got a mechanic that does that." And I did. I thought I had gone to the Promised Land. And I was literally in that department for 2 years, and the aviation director retired, and just was time for him to retire. And he asked me to take over the flight department. So I went from the lowest of lows to the aviation director for a Fortune 500 flight department overnight. And of course, the first thing I did when I came to Berean, I sought out godly men who were way smarter than I. And here's a little trick. Roger was one of these guys that you meet him and you just go, I got to know this guy. So I started my kids in a lawn service business, and I go, "Guys, you need to tithe one service in your business to somebody you just threw their lawn for free." And I go, "I think it should be the local pastor." So I go over there and
My wife
Roger,
hated that because she likes to mow the lawn.
yeah.
We put up with it.
I said, "Roger," my guys are going to come and mow your lawn. And he goes, "Well, Joanne will really like that." I go, "Okay, whatever." but it was like that. Is that I met Jake Chai and Bill Johnson was here and you and I just had men that I could bounce things off of and be real with, and it filled me up. So I had 7 different CEOs at my adventure at my current employment, and every one of them was different. Some of them amazing, and some of them were you'd just scratch your head and go, "How did you get here?" And how did we end up with this? And as I was going in my my service, I had one of my direct reports call me in the office one day and said, "We've got a problem." I said, "Okay, what can I do?" How come you're not serving the new CEO his food and taking care of him when you're flying? And I go, "Well, because I'm the pilot." And and this woman goes, "Well, he thinks that you ought to be taking care of what he needs back there." And I said, "Well, there's actually a federal regulation that says, the crew member can't leave his station unless it's for a physiological need or to operate a system of the aircraft." I go, "By law, I can't do that." And she looked at me like I was making it up. She says, "I want that regulation on my desk today." And I'm used to being trusted, and my previous boss would ask me questions knowing that I had the right answer and believing me, to someone who wouldn't believe anything I said. So, once it all came out, it turned out that in the previous company he had, his pilot was a ladder climber, and he'd go back and tell the other guy to watch up front, and he'd sit back and chat with the CEO trying to go somewhere. And obviously it's unprofessional and not something you'd want to do, but you run into things like that where you just have to let your no be no. But the most critical thing that happened to me in that season of time is they started whittling our department down. We went from 6 airplanes down to 1 airplane and 2 crew members. So I'm doing all the flying, I'm doing all the managing, and then they took my administrative assistant away that did all the scheduling and all the paperwork. And so I'm in the middle of trying to get all this done and believing that I need to shoulder this. God, you wouldn't give me something beyond what I can do. But it got to the point where it was literally beyond what I could do. I'd be up flying, and instead of focusing on what I'm doing in the cockpit, I'm thinking about this bill or this report that I've got to get done. And I stopped being absent, and my co-pilot started calling me out on it. "Are you here? Did you just hear that call?" And there's something about it, men, when we get to the point where we know that we've reached our limit and we have to say, "I can't do this." And I had to call the head of HR and sit her down and say, "Look, I've given it all I can do, but you've taken everything away from me, and I'm at the point where I'm going to hurt myself or somebody else because I can no longer do this job and do it effectively." And she looked at me and with tears in her eyes, and she said, "I am so sorry we have taken you to this point and taken advantage of your attitude and effort to the point where you've reached your end." The next day, I had a different direct report, and I had my administrative assistant back, and my whole world came back. But, it's humbling as men to get to a point when we have to say, I'm there. I've given it all I can. And I offered my resignation saying, "You need to get somebody who's better than I am, and I'll just be a line guy. I'll just fly the line." But God used that in an amazing way. And again, another level of respect and appreciation to the leadership that was above me.
Well, it wasn't only that kind of crisis time, but I mean, you watched your fleet get sold off, and there was a long period of time there where basically, and still is, that they really don't appreciate what you do.
Yeah, there's something that happens in your workplace where God has given you the gifting, and I remember you telling this to us one time, Roger, that once you get a few thousand hours in what you do, you start mastering it as you read and study, and you become someone who knows your trade to the peak. And the beautiful thing about aviation is you want everybody to think that what you do up front is simple and easy. It's safe, the equipment always works, we're always on time, we always get you there, so that they're never in fear or scared. when you talk to pilots who live up front, there's always something going on that you're shaking your head about, and things that happen that you have to make critical decisions on, and yet keep everybody in order in the back of the aircraft. So there's this dance that you do back and forth between making it look easy and knowing that it's not. And then the people you work for just think, well, what do you guys do all day? Do you just like golf? Do you?
Just like a pastor.
Yeah, just like a pastor. God, you come in the morning, have a few cups of coffee, and talk with people. How tough is it?
I even had a donut this morning. It's even better.
But people don't realize the burden you carry, and trying to always, aviation, the thing about aviation is your next standard procedure is written in the blood of somebody else who failed or didn't do it right. And so you're constantly trying to stay ahead of the game of what is it that's just knocking at the door to be the next potential failure that you need to get ahead of and stop. And so it's somewhat exhausting, and yet you want your people to feel like you've mastered it and that you're going to do everything in your power to make sure nothing goes wrong and nothing happens.
Well, John, how do you counsel yourself? What have you kind of lived on in some pretty dark times when you've come home shaking your head and wondering, where's this going? What has kept you going spiritually? What are some things that you could share with us that where wisdom has shined a light into your world?
So I love Proverbs. I probably have 20 Proverbs they're called my aviation Proverbs. There's a proverb that says, "A man sees danger approaching and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it." And there's always a chance where you say, "Hey, the weather's not that bad, we can go." No, the weather is that bad, and we're not going to go, right? And so God's word has come to me, and simply applying it and trusting God is going to use it in some way, even though it looks terrible and you may get in trouble for it, that to me that's a simple principle, is applying God's word in the simplest of terms in your everyday work. And then, the other thing is having true brothers in the Lord. People that you know closely or you work with know for sure whether you really care about them or you're just kind of giving them lip service. And I don't know how to explain it except that it's a heart thing that happens. It's a connection that you have with someone. And, Roger and I are dear brothers. And, there's a connection there that nothing else on earth matches that. Because you can go to him with your greatest joy and your greatest sorrow, and he will hear you. And that's something that, I strive for in true relationships with people and in the people at work. People at work know that I care about that their families are sick. One of our CEO's wife got sick, and you could tell that she was stressed and strained because it was a life-threatening issue. And I'm walking up the tarmac with her to the FBO one day, and I put my arm around her, and I said, "Kathy, I want you to know that I care about you. I have an army of Sunday school people that I'm working with that are praying for you, and that God is the only one who numbers your days. No doctor, no nobody. God is the one, and he loves you, and he's caring for you, and you need to trust him." And she later told me how comforting it was for her, because in the corporate world, you're not supposed to talk God stuff. And the CEOs and their wives, they're fearful of that. But she told me how much that meant to her. And again, being real with people and just letting them know you care and then following up on it, it makes all the difference.
Well, John's been a real brother to me, and one of the things I've learned from you, John, is a proverb. It's a Krall proverb, and that is that ownership is nothing, but access is everything. And he has a pickup and a wood splitter, so I have access to things that I want. But anything else you want to share with us before we have these guys talk about their own lives around the table?
I do. The word says a brother is born for adversity, and there's certain men in your life that that you can bring adversity to. And I recently turned 60, and of course Roger's watched and listened to my entire career. And he knows that we're basically facing the closure of a 65-year flight department right now, which is one of my privileges to do. At our last staff meeting, I told our team, I go, it's our privilege to do this and to leave a great impression of how great these flight departments have been run in this company for 65 years. And one of the other pilot that's with me that I work with every day looks at me and goes, well, that's one way you could put it. But Roger, everybody knows that Roger wrote a book, but nobody knows that Roger is an amazing poet. And so Roger wrote this to me, and this is one of the great treasures of my life. So it's called IFR by Roger Thompson.
You got to explain what that means.
Yeah, I follow roads. Now, instrument flight rules. So how do you fly when you can't see? Okay, making bricks without straw in the cold Mitchell wind, serving the man in a game with no win. Step and fetch it by day, wash the plane every night, on call never ending, no relief was in sight. When one day a call over Egyptian bell brought an exodus out of your brick-making hell. Come fly, Fortune 500, our triple plane fleet, dishing caviar champagne, hello, Easy Street. But knuckleheads ruled where they hadn't a clue and whittled the team down to one plane, two crew. But a Krall lives to serve, whether pharaohs or dolts, and he shoulders the setbacks, despite all the jolts. It's wheels up on time and a smile every day from the pilot who gives far beyond what they pay. You're a servant, my friend, and your master is known by the grace of mistensing and the love you have shown. Now, who wouldn't love to have something like that, huh? Thank you, Bill.
Well, you're the man, John. And many of you guys are or have been in seasons where you feel like I'm working for Pharoah. And sometimes it's an afternoon, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's a project, sometimes it's been years. And there's wisdom around your table and in the Word that will give you encouragement in that. So we have a couple of questions we'd like you to talk about around your tables because the answer is in the room. The answer is probably across the table. And you never know if you're going to speak the answer for some other man. So we've got a couple questions on the board, and let's take some minutes to interact with each other and see how God gives you answers for the day. God bless you.